Okay, so now we're going to look at multiplying and dividing rational expressions. And this is going to use your skills of simplifying more than anything else, and factoring. So in our first problem, it says multiply the expression and state the excluded values. Now, for our first slide here, I have set it up so everything has been factored for us, so we don't really have to worry about that. We'll do the factoring stuff in a future problem. But first we need to state excluded values. Once again, this is where we look at the denominators of our fractions and we just write down what x's won't work. So if we start off, there's nothing in the denominator for the first one, so we're good there. But in the second one, we have this x squared. So we ask the question, what number could we square that would equal 0? You may guess that it is definitely 0. So 0 squared is 0, hence one of the numbers that can't work. Then we have 2x plus 3. Now, if you watched your simplifying rational expression video, you would know that if you have a hard time doing this in your head, which I do think is kind of tough, you just go off to the side and you set it equal to 0 and you solve it out. So I would minus my 3 over, I would divide by 2, and therefore I know my other excluded value is negative 3 over 2. So now that I've done that, I like to simplify first, multiply second. And so what I mean by this is I want to cancel anything out that I can. And you always go from top to bottom. Now you can crisscross between the fractions when it comes to multiplying, but you must always go top to bottom or bottom to top. Okay? So I have a 7. You know what? That cancels out a 7 on the bottom. I have an x squared. That cancels out the x squared on the bottom. So I basically canceled out the 7x squareds. I have a x minus 9. I have no other x minus 9s on the bottom, so I can't cancel that out. I move over to the next one. I have a 9 over here on top. That can cancel out the 9 on the bottom. I have a 2x plus 3. That's going to cancel out the 2x plus 3. Well, it turns out I'm technically multiplying an x minus 9 times 1, because if everything cancels in the fraction, you create the number 1. Like 5 divided by 5, the 5's cancel and it makes 1, because 5 divided by 5 is 1. So x minus 9 times 1 is just, x minus 9. So we have our x minus 9 plus our 2 excluded values, and we finish that problem. So let's take a look at another one. Once again, we want to start looking at the bottom and stating any of our excluded values. So let me erase this over here so we have some room. Okay, so looking at the ends, we can ask ourselves what number plus 10 would equal 0? Well, that would be negative 10. And then we go, okay, what number plus 5 would equal 0? Negative 5. What number minus 3 would equal 0? Positive 3. So now we've just stated our excluded values. Okay, so now once again, I'd like to simplify first and then multiply everything together. So I see I have an n plus 5 on top and an n plus 5 on the bottom, so they can cancel. I see I have a n minus 3 on top and an n minus 3 on the bottom, they can cancel. So what I've really done by canceling that is that I have 1 over n plus 10 times n minus 6 over 1. So if I were to times 1 times n minus 6 is just an n minus 6. And then n plus 10 times 1 is just n plus 10. So I have simplified and multiplied, and now I have my excluded values and my simplified answer. Okay, so once again, we're going to multiply the expression and state the excluded values. But this time, you'll notice that things aren't factored, so we have to factor them before we can start canceling things out and multiplying stuff together. So to do that, I'm going to kind of look through the problem and see where do I need to do a box, where do I need to do GCF factoring. So up top, I have an x plus 8, nothing I can do there. But below it, I have a 3x to the third minus a 30x squared. There's just two terms, which is a very good clue that this is going to need to be GCF'd. I have a 3 and a 30. Well, they have a 3 in common. And I also know that this one has 3 x's and this one has 2 x's. So they share 2 x's. So I can factor out 2 x's. From there, just got to fill in my parentheses. So 3x squared times x would get me 3x to the third. 3x squared times negative 10 would get me negative 30x squared. So now that I've factored the bottom, I go to the next fraction. I have 2 terms again, a 3 and a 9. Well, they definitely have a greatest common factor. So I can take a 3 out. I notice there's 3 x's here and 2 x's here. So they share at least 2 x's. And then we just fill in our parentheses. So I know that 3x squared times x would get me 3x to the third. 3x squared times 3 would get me 9x squared. So now that I've factored everything, I do want to start stating my excluded values. So I looked at the denominators, I look at their x's, I have a x squared. So I ask myself, what number squared would equal 0? A 0. So x cannot equal 0. Then I go to the next x in the denominator. What number minus 10 would equal 0? Positive 10. I go to my next x, and I think you get what that one would be. So now that I've done the excluded values, I want to try to simplify anything I can, and then I will multiply everything together. So I can see that I have an x plus 8. That will cancel out the x plus 8 in the other fraction in the bottom. Remember, you can go top to bottom. You can jump between the fractions, but one must be on top, one must be on the bottom. From there, I have a 3x squared, cancels out a 3x squared. And so what I'm left with as a problem is 1 over x minus 10 times x plus 3 over 1. Well, now I just times them together. 1 times x plus 3 is x plus 3. And then x minus 10 times 1 is just x minus 10. And now I have my simplified answer with my excluded values. Okay, our next multiplication problem. This one, looking through, I just have a 1 on top, nothing I can do there. X plus 2, nothing I can do there. But the top right, I got a trinomial. That lets me know I need to make a box. So if I'm going to draw a box, say over here, I'm going to have my x squared, my negative 14, my negative 5x. X squared times negative 14 is negative 14x squared. I need to figure out 2 numbers that multiply to be the negative 14x squared. But those same 2 numbers will combine to get you negative 5x. I want to say it is negative 7x times 2. Yeah, that works. And so this would be x times x, and then x times 2 would get me 2x. X times negative 7 would get me negative 7x. And so now I'm just going to rewrite the problem, but now it's factored. All right, so now that I've done that, now I want to go ahead and state my excluded values by looking at the denominator. So I know this will be negative 2, and I know I'll have a positive 3 as my excluded values. So now I can start canceling. I have an x plus 2 cancels out an x plus 2. And that's all that really cancels. So I'm really left with 1 over 1 times x minus 7 and then x minus 3 on the bottom. So 1 times x minus 7 is just x minus 7. 1 times x minus 3 is just x minus 3. All right. All right, so we have done multiplication. So now we're going to look at division. Division is basically the exact same thing as multiplication, except you do the classic keep, change, flip that you might remember from back in elementary school, middle school. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to look at the problem as is and see if there's anything we can factor. I don't see anything I can factor, but I do see that I could rewrite something in a better way. And that is right here. I could rewrite this in a better way. Now, if you remember from the simplifying radical video, I can rewrite this as negative 1 x plus 4. Correction, x minus 4, sorry. This is x, this is 1 plus x. That's the same thing as saying x plus 1. There's no switching signs or anything like that because they're both positive. But once again, if you have the number in front, a minus, then an x, you can switch the position and you basically have a negative 1 in front, and that's how you always can rewrite it really quickly. So now my problem is really 8 parentheses x minus 4 over 8 divide negative 1 x minus 4 x plus 1 over 7. So I want to deal with my excluded values. So I looked at the denominator for x's. No x, no x. So no excluded values currently. Now I'm going to go ahead and do my division by keep, change, flip. So I keep the first one the way it is. I change the divide to a times. I flip my second fraction. And now before I start doing any canceling or anything like that, I go back and I look for excluded values. So there's nothing here but an 8, so nothing I can do there, but here's an x. So one of my excluded values is going to be positive 4. Here's another x. The other excluded value is going to be negative 1. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and we can start doing our canceling. I see that 8 can cancel out the 8 on the bottom. I see a x minus 4 can cancel out an x minus 4 here. And that looks like it's it. So I technically have 1 times 7 over negative 1 x plus 1, which means that's really an answer of 7 over negative 1 x plus 1 with my excluded values. And you've divided. Right, last problem. Divide the expression and state the excluded values. So once again, before we start, see if you can divide anything, see if you can factor anything. I know some things I can factor. On the top, I have a 4x minus 4. That's a GCF. I can factor out a 4. On the bottom, that's a trinomial. There's 3 terms. I'm going to need a box to factor that. So I'm just going to go off to the side, make a little box. And so I'm basically asking 2 numbers that multiply to be negative 7x squared, but would add to be 6x. Therefore, that combination would be negative 1x and positive 7x. Yeah, that'll work. So I will have a 7x here, a negative 1x here, and so x times x gets me the x squared, x times negative 1 gets me negative 1x, x times 7 gets me 7x. So on the bottom, I have x plus 7 and x minus 1. Now before I do any keep, change, flip, anything like that, because this is a divide problem, I do need to state my excluded values. So looking at the bottom, I have an x plus 7 there, so one of the excluded values is going to be negative 7. I have x minus 1, so one of the excluded values is going to be positive 1. I have an x plus 7, so one of my excluded values is a negative 7. I've already stated it, I don't have to say it again. So now that I've stated excluded values, now I can go ahead and do the division of keep, change, flip. So I have 4x minus 1 over x plus 7, x minus 1 times, and now I flip. And now once again, I need to check to see if I have any new excluded values. And I do. I have a x minus 10 on the bottom now, so one of my excluded values is going to be positive 10. So now I can go ahead and start canceling. So x plus 7 can cancel out the x plus 7. x minus 1 cancels out the x minus 1. So now I'm down to a 4 in the numerator and a 10 in the denominator. So technically I have 4 over 1 times 1 over x minus 10, which means I have 4 times 1, which is 4, 1 times x minus 10, which is just an x minus 10. So I'll just put all my answers over here. So now I've divided and I've stated my excluded values.